Boys, knobs, mega knobs, lend me your ears. Not literally, I is not a pain boy and I has no medical qualifications. I is legally required to tell you that. Today I is going to be taking you through Orc tactics in the 8th edition of Warhammer 40,000. Bring it! Ha!
To keep up to date with everything at Knights at the Game Table, all you have to do is click subscribe and then hit that tiny little notification button next to it, so every time we upload a new video, YouTube will be sure to let you know.
The Orc army is fantastic fun to play. Orcs have a long history of being a fun, zany race that have had a die-hard following all throughout the history of Warhammer 40k, and today I'm going to talk to you about some of the most effective ways to play them and how to get the most out of your models in an 8th edition game of Warhammer 40,000. Historically, Orcs have had two main ways of putting together an army. The first is the Green Tide, the Horde Rush, where you put a couple of hundred minis on the board and throw them at the enemy, and the other is to put together a Dread Mob, a wacky array of machines and vehicles, Gorkanauts, Morkanauts, jets, scrap heaps, and fling that at the enemy and see what sticks. So far in 8th edition, the most effective of these two has been the Green Tide Horde Rush, but I'm going to talk about both of them in a bit of detail as we get further into the video. Your defining characteristics for your Green Tide are that you've got a large number of models. They're strength 4, toughness 4, which makes them good in close combat. They output a lot of attacks, but they have a terrible save, so they are easily mowed down by high rate of fire weapons, even if they don't do much damage, or even if they aren't much good at penetrating armor. One of the hallmarks of a list like this is a threat overload of the Horde. You just put down so many infantry models, your opponent cannot possibly deal with them all in a timely fashion before they have to engage with you on your terms. A couple of popular ways to do this are to take 120 to maybe even 180 boys, or possibly even maybe 90 to 120 boys, and then another 90 storm boys, which is the same profile but with jetpacks. Once you've got that many models on the board, you want to start mitigating their weaknesses. The first of which is getting across the board quickly enough to engage before you get taken out by your enemy's anti-infantry weapons. Now, in a list like this, I would look to maximize the amount of infantry and minimize the amount of vehicles and other targets that might be presented for your opponent's anti-tank weapons. You don't want to give them a mix of targets so they can fire their anti-infantry stuff and kill your infantry, and your anti-tank stuff to take out your vehicles. You ideally want to put them in a position where as much of half of their weaponry is going to be ineffective against you as possible. Obviously, I'm not saying don't take any vehicles at all, just if you're going Horde heavy, be a bit sparing about it and try and position them, particularly during setup, so you're going to get more mileage out of them before they get taken down. Getting yourself across the board in 8th edition, I'm reluctant to use the vehicles. Firstly, for the aforementioned reason of making your opponent's anti-tank weapons less useful, but also because your effective unit of boys or storm boys has 30 models in it. And the maximum capacity you can possibly have on a vehicle is a battle wagon holding 20. And that's an expensive vehicle just to move 120 points worth of infantry across the board. So I would start looking at other options. Aside from just slogging it across, you've got two main units you can look to. The first is some manner of Warboss, and that includes Warbosses on bikes and mega armor, as well as Gazgel Thralka, the character Warboss. All of these units have an ability called War, which, if you've been following my previous videos, is what Orcs are all about. This rule allows you to advance and charge in the same turn, which is going to give you a lot of extra threat range on the turn in which you connect, and lets you chance things a bit earlier on and go for an advance that might not otherwise be advantageous because it might just put you in range to connect. The other big unit I'd look at is the Weird Boy, for one psychic power in particular, the Jump. The Jump lets you teleport one unit across the board, and then that unit will still be able to charge that turn. It'll land 9 inches away, so with the Orks reroll ability, here we go, you has got about a 50-50 chance of making that charge, particularly if you're willing to use a command point reroll. If you roll a 4 or better on one of your dice, it's better to re-roll an individual second dice instead of re-rolling both and going for it. Of course, no matter how well you do on your advancing and charging, no matter how many Storm Boys you take, Storm Boys can make the turn 1 charge with the advanced charge by themselves, you are still going to get a lot of your infantry shot at, or maybe even charged or countercharged against another assault army. But there are ways to mitigate this damage, which I'll take you on to now. Firstly, there are custom force fields. The cheapest and probably most efficient way to field one is on a big mech, probably on a war bike, but big mech on foot, big mech in mega armor, the Morkanaut and the Wasbom blaster jet can all also take custom force fields. This very useful upgrade gives you a 5-up invulnerable save in a bubble around the unit projecting it, and is very, very useful in reducing enemy incoming firepower against ranged weapons. There's also the Pain Boy, which gives a 6-up feel no pain. That's ignore a wound on a 6 to any unit that's within 3 inches. And you can position your units to trail back a couple of models so that one of the models in that unit is within 3 inches of your Pain Boy, and the Pain Boy will then cover the entire unit. My personal rationale for this is if an Ork gets his head chopped off at the front of the field, it gets passed back and sewn back on, and he gets put back into the back, because frankly, Orks are made of fungus and that's the kind of surgery they can take. Pain Boys also supplement your Weird Boys very well. Weird Boys have an ability called War Energy, which gives them a huge bonus based on the number of Ork models around them, and you can get up to +8, +10 on your psychic checks. That means 2 things. Number 1, it means you're going to have massive D6 smites, putting out a huge amount of mortal wounds. And before there were some restrictions put on the number of individual models of the same type you could take in a tournament, competitive Ork lists would field 6 to 9 Weird Boys quite happily to take advantage of its massive mortal wound output. Of course, putting out those huge smites is also going to make them perils. Perils of the warp, which is going to make them take mortal wounds themselves. The Pain Boys can mitigate these on a 6, and then once per turn, they can turn around and heal up a D3 wounds to a unit that has taken damage. The Weird Boys are your primary target for that, and you can accomplish this with either a Pain Boy on a war bike, or even the character Pain Boy, Mad Doc Grotznick, who has the advantage of being pretty handy in a scrap on top of everything else. One more note on the Storm Boys, if you're fielding them. They can advance and charge all by themselves, but if they do, they have a 1 in 6 to blow up on each of them as they overheat their jetpacks and go hurtling into the fray. Now, they might not mind this, but I do. So if you combine them with a Warboss of any kind, their War ability will let that unit advance and charge without taking a penalty. This was something there were a bunch of questions about for the first 6 months here of the game, and then it was clarified in an FAQ. You can do this, you can ignore the penalty, and it's great to save you 5 or 6 models on a charge and get all 30 Storm Boys in and crump in where they belong. Let's talk a little bit about assault tactics. Now, anyone who's played more than a game or 2 or has played any kind of war game for more than 5 minutes knows that generally you want to shoot your opponent's fighter units and fight your opponent's shooter units. That should stand to reason. But beyond that, there's some nuances and tactics you can use to maximize your assault army. One of the most defining rules in this edition of the game is that units in combat cannot be shot at. So you can protect your units from being shot if you can engage other units along the way and manage to not kill all of them. You can either do this by assigning all your attacks to another adjacent unit, or by charging one unit and then after combat consolidating into another one. Now, you should bear in mind that if other units withdraw away from you, other units in your opponent's army can then turn around and shoot the unit that's disengaged. So one key tactic is creating a prison, a pincer, some people call it a hug, where you put enough units around at least one of your enemy models that they cannot get out no matter how much they want to. Another advantage of this tactic is that that surrounded enemy unit will be obliged to turn around and fight you in their next fight phase. That means that after they put their attacks on your boys, which are probably not going to be killing 30 of you or anywhere near close, you're going to then be able to turn around, pile in, fight yourself, and then consolidate into yet another unit and dish out even more damage and mayhem. When executing this tactic, it's important to keep in mind enemy units that can fly can just zoom right out and ignore you, and there are some other units, particularly Imperial Knights, which are able to step over infantry. So just keep an eye out for things like that when you're trying to take a prisoner. You could also mitigate your opponent's firepower by charging their actual shooty units. Generally, Overwatch won't be too much of an issue, particularly if you're clever with your custom force field, your pain boy, or even charging through or around a piece of terrain to avoid line of sight to their models. Once engaged, most units in the game cannot shoot after falling back. So simply by engaging their shooty heavy units, they are going to be unable to shoot you on the next turn. It is very important to watch out for factions like the Ultramarines and stratagems like the ones that the Eldar race have that allow those units to fall back and still shoot. So make sure you check with your opponent. There's no way for them to do that before you commit to doing something like that and getting shot in the face. Your boys and storm boys are going to put out a colossal amount of strength 4 hits at AP 0. That's going to mow down infantry of all sorts and put a significant dent into anything that doesn't have great armor or a great save. However, you are going to run into units that do have great armor and do have great saves. I'm talking about your super heavies, your Baneblade variants, your Imperial Knights, anything with toughness 8 and a nice big high save is going to give you a problem. Now there are two ways you can deal with a unit like this. Number one is you can decide that you can ignore it, particularly with, say, the very popular on Knights of the Game table Leviathan Dreadnought. This unit is devastating at range, but in a lot of armies has no way to fall back and shoot, and if equipped with its really powerful ranged loadout, has nothing in the way of ranged weapons. As soon as you connect with it, it is a great big expensive scrap of iron that is going to kill maybe 2 boys of combat and do nothing else whatsoever. You can also, in some cases, just soak up some firepower, particularly from a heavy anti-tank weapon against your huge army of infantry, where you're not going to lose a huge amount of models to it, and then you can just play the mission, take the objectives, fight the other enemy units, and win at the end of turn 5 or 6. Of course, sometimes you really are going to have to take out one of those big, nasty enemy units, but we've got options for that. Amongst your infantry, you can take big choppers, and most especially kill saws and power claws. All these weapons have multi-damage output and great armor reduction bonuses to cut through and dish out some serious damage to those heavy enemy units. Look particularly to get these on your boss knobs, as they're effectively free other than the cost of the weapon upgrade, and you can also look taking it a squad like, for example, knobs or knobs on war bikes to give you a nicer range of heavy close combat weapons. No matter how much you love close combat, you are probably still going to want some fire support, and there are some great options in the form of anti-tank, anti-toughness 8 weaponry. Some particular favourites right now include tank busters with their flat 3 damage rocket launchers, which are just crazy, and their free reroll against vehicles. Side note, if you want some extra rockets in your army and can't find any other way to fit them in, you can take up to 3 rocket boys per boy squad, and that can get you some 3 damage shots to give you a bit of variance and some extra damage against those high toughness targets. Other good options include big guns, mech guns, particularly for cannons, and custom mega cannons, both putting out that all-important Strength 8 attack and a lot of damage. Most of the other options start to get a bit expensive and a bit less efficient as the strength of the weapons drops and the points cost of the units and weapons increases, but hopefully with the Codex coming out soon, you're probably living in a time when it exists. I'm in the past here. Looters and flash kits, maybe even some of the other heavy vehicles will also have a use. Getting onto the other type of list, whether you're going more of a dread mob with your walkers, killer cans, death dreads, Gorkanaut, Morkanaut, or you're going more of a cult of speed, speed freak, speed wah kind of approach with some of the new buggies that are coming out soon, or with other wheeled vehicles, tracked vehicles. What you're looking for in an army like this is, again, I try and have some kind of threat overload. I wouldn't want a bunch of boys sitting at the front of an army like this, because that's just going to give targets to both your enemy's anti-infantry and their anti-tank weapons. Stick a bunch of high toughness stuff on the board, stick your infantry inside a battle wagon or maybe a truck, and that'll give you a lot more mileage. You can look to support this with a couple of characters. The Warboss becomes much less useful without infantry to buff, but you can definitely look at taking a couple of big mechs to make up your detachments. Those custom force fields are still going to come in super handy, and their ability to repair vehicles is going to start getting you some extra value right there. Now, these units are a bit less points efficient right now. Again, that's another thing. We're going to hope it's going to get better with a codex and with chapter approved. But some of the key players right now are the jets. Most of them are quite good. The Dakar jet is very good. The burner bomber is particularly good fun and puts out a lot of mortal wounds. And if your opponent makes the mistake of killing it, it also has a fantastic chance to explode on a 4-up and deal a lot of burning wreckage damage when it lands. Getting a bit more exotic, Forge World has got a couple of excellent options for this list you might want to take a look at. First of all, there is the big track with the Super Scorcher, which is a fantastic high damage AP flamer with 4d3 auto hits and a fantastic 24-inch range, rarely seen on a weapon like that. That's built on to a nice tough chassis with a good toughness and a good number of wounds, very hard for your opponent to remove, and you can even stick 5 infantry in there. Maybe 6. There's also the Mecha Dread, probably the best of the walkers, again at time of recording, which has the ability to supercharge its movement across the board, roll anything other than a 1, and you can take a huge move and maybe even make that turn 1 charge. And you've always got your command point reroll to make it very unlikely that that's going to make you come a cropper. With a list like this, I'd be looking to maximize my firepower. I'd be looking to take out my opponent's anti-infantry before I thought about disembarking any knobs or other elites I might have brought for a force like this. And then I'd look to take over the game a little bit later than I would in the other list and score my points or achieve my table wipe victory a little bit further towards the end. That is the Warboss's Guide to Tactics for Orks in 8th edition in the 41st millennium. It is the most fun you is going to have with your clothes on, and if you is playing in the comfort of your own home, you can even do it without any. Enjoy!